this computer. Okay, I think it's working. So, hello, I'm Florin, an old alumnus of this department.
Please don't say that.
Finished.
It seems like only yesterday to me.
Well, same here. So I finished in 2008, and this thing is part of a broader project. That's what I'm presenting is the Romanian part, so to say. I'm a researcher at the Center for the Study of Democracy at Babeș-Bolyai University, Cluj, Romania. And I also come not only as a researcher at Babeș-Bolyai University, but also as the Romanian representative in the Erasmus Plus project, which is called Civimatics. It's mathematical modeling with civic education. And okay, let's hope this works. This should work. Yeah. Now about this one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yes, okay, sorry.
Okay, so oops, sorry.
You did it, right arrow. Yeah.
So I will mostly talk about the book project, but I will just say a few words at the very beginning about the project itself, and I'll end up with some ideas that I have in addition to the book itself that relate to the book project, but they're not part of the book project, let's say. Okay, so the project Civimatics is, as I mentioned, an Erasmus Plus project. There's 5 universities involved. Oops, yeah. You have to remember to click on both. There's 2 German universities. The Leibniz University, Hanover, is the coordinating university. There's also the University of Paderborn. Then there's the University of Vienna and the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And finally, the 5th member of the project is my home university, Babeș-Bolyai University, and I'm representing that in the project. And so I'm really grateful to both my home institution and the project, because my trip well, I've been to MPSA prior to my visit to Urbana-Champaign, and this so comes with partial funding from my home university, and the rest of the funding comes from the Erasmus Plus project. And the project itself, just say a few more words, is about the connection between civic education, scientific education, and democratic performance. That's the general idea of the project. And if my book project actually is successful and turns into a book, I'd like to think that it will make a contribution to this project, because that's my idea of the book itself. Okay. So, so this is the general idea of the book project. Oops.
We saw it, the freaking project, and then it just.
Oh, sorry. Oops.
There we
Okay.
go.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I've that's that's what happens when you're trying to make it fancier than you should. Okay. So you probably are familiar with Freakonomics. I'm thinking about this book being pretty similar as a general idea, but a bit slightly more methodologically oriented. So in order to illustrate to, say, an undergrad audience, so the book could be like a companion to a classical textbook in an intro to research methods class, but also to the general public, what science is about. And to me, I'm thinking about the book with having examples from both social science, political science, as well as real science, as medical science.
Yes.
And that would be, in my mind, a bonus, as in science is science. So we look at different subjects, but the logic is, generally speaking, and the approach is the same. And I'll have 3 examples that I will discuss today. The first example, so that I claim some original contribution, is mine. Carol and Brian are, well, 15 years ago would have been way more familiar because it was not a central part, but a little part of my dissertation. So that's my example, so to say. The other examples in the book would be stories, research by people, scholars, in many cases, not always scholars, but people way smarter than I am. But I am retelling their stories for a broader audience. Okay, so start with the first example, my example. Okay, so generally speaking, if you look at the vote at the regional level for a given party or candidate, and if that's, say, let's focus with a candidate. If that candidate runs again in the next election, then you would expect the regional level votes for that candidate in the 2 elections to be highly correlated. So let's take Trump in 2016 and 2020, his vote at state level. Oops, yeah. You should see what I'm seeing. Okay. That's not only that's highly correlated, it's almost perfect correlation. I've seen this before, but 0.99 is really even more than usual. So again, maybe 0.99, you wouldn't expect that, you would expect it to be really highly correlated. Now, how this, and you'll see this in the US, you'll see this in Romania, it's almost universal. Now, how does this relate to Ukraine? Well, as paraphrasing the saying, like in the news, is not news when a dog bites a man, it's news when it's the other way around. So this is kind of like that, is what happens when it's not. You don't see it. What we see in Ukraine in the 1990s is a strong correlation, but it's negative. So that's, if you don't know a lot about Ukrainian politics, that's kind of surprising, right? So, Kuchma was the challenger in 1994. In 1999, he was the incumbent president. And what's going on here? Things don't get any, less surprising. Actually, perhaps even more surprising if we think of mapping the candidates in the two elections on a left-right scale. So Simonenko and Kravchuk were Kuchma's opponents. I'm only looking at the runoff to make it simpler. So two candidates, because they have runoff elections like in France, pretty much. Okay, so Kuchma was, I would say, most scholars would agree that he was kind of on the center right, on the left-right dimension, whereas both his opponents, Kravchuk in 1994, Simonenko in 1999, were to his left. So why the dramatic shift in the vote? Well, in order to truly understand what was going on, and maybe what's going on right now is kind of a hunch. Ukrainian politics, the left-right dimension is not necessarily the most important thing in Ukrainian politics. It's rather the Ukrainian nationalist versus Russophile dimension. And if we map the candidates along this second dimension as well, Kravchuk was the incumbent president in 1994. He was a Ukrainian nationalist, whereas Kuchma at the time in 1994 was seen as the guy who would call the Kremlin every 5 minutes to find out what he's supposed to do and say. That situation changed and kind of reversed in 1999. His opponent in the 1999 runoff was Piotr Simonenko, the leader of the Communist Party. Very, very Russophile. So even though Kuchma's position didn't change much, his relative position to his relative to his opponent in the election shifted dramatically, right? So in 1994, he was disliked by Ukrainian nationalists. He became the default choice in 1999. Right? So that explained the dramatic shift and how the Western regions voted against him, voted for him in 1994, and conversely, Eastern regions voted for him in 1994 and against him in 1999. So that's my Ukraine story. The next story is how the introduction of electronic voting machines in Brazil led to dramatic improvement in infant health. And you might have the same reaction if you're not aware of this work. Might have the same reaction that I had when I first read this piece, which was kind of, I don't know what the Thomas Kujivara is the name of this scholar was smoking when writing this stuff, but I want some, because how on earth would the introduction of the electronic voting machine lead to an improvement, significant improvement in infant health? Well, after reading the stuff, it became one of my favorite pieces of political science. So the guy's an economist by training, ever. And I thought it's now in my top things that I think about. Well, when I grow up, I would wish I would write something like that. I would do research like this. Okay, so there's a couple of ingredients that make well, okay, I'm getting a bit ahead. There's a really cool natural experiment, and we will see something similar in the next example from the history of medicine, but we'll get to that. So there's a natural experiment that we have, and what was going on in Brazil in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So as we all know, Brazil is very large, it's very unequal, both kind of horizontally across regions and states and what have you, and vertically across social groups. Has a very, very high illiteracy rate. That's about 1/3 of adults are illiterate. Has also a very complicated electoral system. And instead of voting, one actually have to write in either the name of the candidate or a 4 or 5 digits number corresponding to the candidate. And that's all these things, when we put them together, we saw that prior to the introduction of electronic voting machine, you had up to close to 1/3 of votes being invalid. Okay, and the last cool thing was a happy accident, happy for us as social scientists, and especially for Fujiwara, was that the introduction of electronic voting machines was gradual, right? So really like in an experiment, sorry. Yes, so this is how paper ballot used to look like in Brazil. So you really had to write down, as you see below, the name of the candidate or number corresponding to that candidate. And then this is how they put. Yeah, it helps when you actually see it. This is the interface of electronic voting machines. Now, obviously, this will show up once you type in the number, in this example, 92111. And then the number, if it does correspond to candidates, the picture of the candidates, the name of the candidate, and the party of the candidate will show up. And if it is indeed the candidate that you wanted to vote it for, you press the green button and you're done. If not, if something's wrong, you press the orange button and you restart the process. So what were the consequences? Okay, here's a figure from arguably my mind. So the paper that I'm talking about was published in Econometrica, is over 40 pages long, 3/4 of it are, to me, complete gibberish, statistical mumbo jumbo. I have no clue what's going on there. But the story itself of this paper is very cool and very intuitive for virtually anyone. Is very intuitive. So we have at the bottom, right, the green line are the invalid votes. Well, actually, I should say valid votes. That's what we have over here, percentage of valid votes in the last election that used just paper ballots. That was 1994. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. So I said the introduction of electronic voting machines was gradual. Initially, it was in the 1998 election in places that had over 40,000 registered voters. Yeah. So this really is, yeah, we see the 1994 election like the pretest. Yeah. This would be the control group, the smaller cities, villages, what have you, places with less than 40,000 voters. So this would be the test, right? The control group and the group receiving the treatment. So we see a dramatic drop in invalid votes here, but not here. Right? And finally, in 2002, where all Brazil was using just electronic voting machines, we see a significant drop, a dramatic drop in percentage of invalid votes everywhere. So this, to me, even when I got to this far in the paper, I thought, gee, this is so cool. I wish I would do something like this ever. But we are talking, what he was talking about, infant health. So how do we get to infant health? Yeah.
Just an observation.
Yeah.
I was surprised by the graphics showing electronic voting because I had assumed that the solution to literacy is touch screens with pictures and thinking about ballot ballots in the past in places of literacy, often there's an elephant or a star or something similar. But a number pad rate to type in 92111 seems only a modest improvement over having to write 92111, especially when it's a 5-digit number. So I can't argue with the graph, it seems to work, but if the image made it think that this is actually not the most voter-friendly electronic voting arrangement.
Well, the indirect answer to this, and I could look at the study I'm thinking of now, as it may not be that intuitive, but empirically it is proven, irrespective. We're not talking about elections now. The introduction of mobile phones in the third world makes a huge difference, and they are actually very intuitive to use, even by illiterate people. So, well, and if that's the case, if it's not just one number that you dial over and over again, I assume we're talking about more than one number in those circumstances. Here is just one. And okay, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, and I'm not sure how this would.
I can imagine it's hard to write the numbers, so it could have been like the right numbers and they would be considered valid.
Yeah.
It's really sort of punching them
Yeah,
in.
right.
So that, I was actually thinking a little bit about how much of it is always tabulation fraud, rather than people can't write 92111, but they can. But then as can I say, oh, that I don't know what that number is. So it's a little bit unclear.
Well, I guess that is a very good question, and which is what the real explanation is. Sure, but that's a different topic.
Doesn't change the figures.
The idea, yeah, right. The idea is that irrespective of what was going on before, it did make a difference here. So one way or another. So every vote should be counted. And now, if that was previously, those 30% of invalid votes were kind of a random sample from the voter population, it will still be bad because, yeah, we say every vote should be counted, but still wouldn't be that bad. Now, your hunch and my hunch would be that that was clearly not random sample. So there were largely, if not mostly, exclusively poor illiterate voter who were affected by this. So we're finally getting to infant health. The causal chain is a bit longer, but it's kind of intuitive. So this is not a figure from Fujiwara, but I would hope that he would largely agree with my summary of his argument. I try to put everything in just one figure. So once you have the introduction of the electronic voting machine, you have an effective enfranchisement of a large number of voters, would predominantly be poor, less educated, right? And an immediate result that we saw in places that had electronic voting machines was that there was a dramatic increase in electoral support for left-wing candidates and parties, right? And that was consequential for policy making. Yeah? So we see increasing spending for programs such as healthcare, and we also see that future mothers, pregnant women would make a significant increased use of the medical facilities. And this was solely for lower class women. So middle class women, upper class women, you see no difference whatsoever. And finally, as a consequence of this, we see a decreased incidence of low weight births. Low weight births among lower socioeconomic status women, and the whole literature, medical literature, says that this is really important. Yeah. So being underweight when you are born can affect your health for the rest of your life. So this really is an important result. So it's not just something good for democracy, it's also something good for society, for social development, so to say. So I thought it was a fantastic research, really cool one. And again, if you just look at the paper, the typical reader, the typical public, or even, undergrad who look at this paper, I think would get scared and would say, well, this is clearly completely incomprehensible. Well, yes, might well be if you look at all the statistical appendices, but the story itself is really cool and really intuitive. And final papers, okay, my joke that I tell to my students, this would be probably like the 567th time that I'm telling this joke. I never get enough of it, telling my students, well, there is good news and bad news. The good news is today we will talk about Jon Snow. The bad news is, well, no, it's not that Jon Snow. It's this one. Is Dr. Jon Snow, who lived in mid-19th century England, in London to be more specific, and who's one of the most important figures in the history of epidemiology. Okay, so what is the story of Jon Snow, the ghost man? Oops, I went a bit too quickly. Cholera was one of the biggest things, biggest challenges for medical science and medical practice in the 19th century. And we had miasma theory, which was not, I think, even saying that it was predominant would be an understatement. It was pretty much all doctors, all scientists would say that's the cause. There's something in the air that causes cholera. Now, and whereas the germ theory, Jon Snow was an clear outlier at the time, said no, there's something in water. Cholera is not airborne. But unfortunately, since the microscope was not invented yet, he couldn't really prove it, just by lots and lots of indirect evidence that would strongly suggest that it's not something in the air, it's something in the water. Now, because miasma theory was predominant, what they were doing in London, because we're talking about London, that's where our story happened. Well, they would take all the human waste and dump it into Thames in order to improve the quality of air, which clearly, since now, as we all know, it is not airborne, it is caused by impurities in water. They were only making things worse, right? another important actor on this story, in addition to Joe Snow, helped him a lot, was Reverend Henry Whitehead. John Snow was practicing, and Reverend Henry Whitehead had his parish. They're both in Soho, where our story happens. And the Broad Street water pump and the ghost map is what we see in the next. Oops. And you would also see, if I can show, if I would show it to you. If not, you'd have to take my word on that one. Talking about this, many said, well, it's not the most famous map in the history of maps. It's the second most famous. The most famous being a map of the Napoleon's campaign in Russia. So what do we have here? Here we have in red, well, it's just one version of the Joe Snow's ghost map. My recollection, I don't think it's Joe Snow's actual, well, he didn't make the map, but the map is based on his work and his research. So the higher the red bars, the higher the number of deaths. So this is what the red bars represent. And the blue flags are water pumps. And over there, you can't see it very well, but that's the water pump that caused the outbreak of cholera in 1854. So this, in a way, you can see it. Oops, you cannot see it yet. Now you can see it. So it's another way of looking at the map. So we have more or less the same information. So that's the Broad Street water pump. And here is, well, among many other things, John Snow helped by Reverend John Whitehead, did detective work, anthropological, quasi-anthropological medicine, medical research. So they traced the first case. It was a newborn girl who got sick, and her parents threw the diapers in the waste, and the, what do you call it, like the refuse, what they threw it was literally feet away from that water pump. So that's water got infected, and from there all the hell broke loose. So that's a really cool part of the story, but it's just part of the story. We get to the natural experiment. That's, even though it's about cholera, is in some significant ways very similar to the previous one, the story of Brazil. So what we had in mid-19th century London was that water was supplied by a couple of major companies. And here we are interested in two. So we have a map of London, and here we have in green kind of places that were that water was supplied by the company called Southwark and Vauxhall. Here we have another company called Lambeth. And interestingly enough, there was this area, including Soho, where we saw that outbreak, where both companies provided water. And it was really random, as in, I get water from Southwark, and our colleague who lives across the street from me will get it from Lambeth, and so on and so forth. So it was very, very mixed all over. And the cool part with the natural experiment, like in Brazil, we had a happy accident, well, happy for the researchers, also happy for the users of the Lambeth and Waterworks company. So in 1849, both companies will take their water from the Thames, from within London, right? And they had, unfortunately, I couldn't find the actual data for 1849, so you'll have not to take my word. If you read the literature, everybody says the death rate for the two companies was the same, was not the same, very similar. That's caused by cholera. In between, after the 1849 cholera epidemic, but before the next one, in 1853-54, Lambeth Waterworks changed the source of the water upstream. Yeah? So it was in London, it was upstream, thus less polluted, while Southwark kept their intake within London. And here we see a comparison, and again, unfortunately, it's only for the second epidemic after the treatment. So we see that the death rates for the two companies differ by almost an order of magnitude, right? Yeah, it's almost tenfold decrease for Lambeth, who changed the source of water upstream. So yet again, I thought this was an incredibly cool story. And you know, if things work out, and eventually when I'll have a book, I could point out, even though one story is about mostly about you know, institutional, well, kind of institutional, electoral design, yeah, voting systems, and the other one is about medical research. We have two experiments that are natural experiments, right, that are very similar in some important respects, right? So whether you're a medical researcher or a social scientist, in some ways you're doing the exact same type of research. So that's in a nutshell the idea of my book project, and I end up just saying a few more words about in an ideal world, the book would have a companion, and what the companion would be about, Tableau companion, would be to say, well, for whoever's interested in replicating the graphs, the maps, everything that's in the first book, here's the Tableau companion that shows you how to do it. Yeah. And obviously I'll provide all the data sets as well, where I have them. I do already have lots of them. Some of them I'm working on it. Hopefully I could get them as well. There will be, yeah, the web companion will have the PowerPoints for all the discussion of each chapter and the data sets. And there will be a YouTube companion for both the companion and the book itself, like I'm presenting to you today. For every chapter, I'll have one YouTube presentation for the chapter, and then one YouTube presentation for the Tableau Public part. And I'll say, well, here's how you can make the graphs, maps, and stuff. So this is a kind of illustration, and also, to me, kind of fun illustration. So this is actually replication, so to say, in Tableau Public on Jon Snow's map. Now, this was actually done by a student of mine. So we do have the water pumps and the number of that, but then if you look more closely, where this is over here, well, now you cannot see very well. But what it says here is Sony Entertainment something. So the data set is the same, but the map is very recent. I was actually talking to Brian, maybe he knows some people in Britain. I will try to get in touch with other, like Ken Benoit, who's at LSE now, see if I can get a map from mid-19th century rather than a current one with Sony Entertainment and stuff like that. But so, okay, here's some examples. Oh, not over here, sorry, over here. So for instance, oops, Slava Ukraine, but not right now, in 5 minutes. Okay, I can't seem to make the mouse work. Well, it's not that important. What you see there are would have been maps that I've made using the Tableau Public, including something like locality vaccination rates in Romania at locality level, so like 3,000 cases. So and that's pretty cool. And it's the first time I've seen that. I thought, well, a map like that, I thought this will take you like a year to learn how to do it. It actually takes you like 10 or 15 minutes to make a map that's really cool. So anyways, I guess I don't have a conclusion. So instead, I have a quasi-conclusion. I will just say thank you for your attention and glory to Ukraine. Okay. Thank you.
I haven't read the article, the econometrica article for
Right.
your second point. The causal chain is a little longer there, and you know, but it may be that they work on that about what else was going on at the time of the electoral system change.
Yeah.
You know, the John Snow experiment is, of course, you know, basic, and that, you know,
Right.
I think political scientists don't get out of graduate school without being exposed to it some way or another. You know, but so anyway, so you know, the comment there, I would like to know what they did to think about what else was going on. And like Brian, I was rather surprised that this was more transparent to the voter than, but in any case, but the other thing I wanted to ask you, and at the very end, you showed that you have a map of, you know, the COVID patterns in Romania. I wonder if you could comment a little bit about how, and you have been working on COVID analysis, about you know, how we should think about the kind of issue you raised here, vaccination rates, and what kind of story, because you're interested in the intersection between health and science. This is another one. So your thoughts on what you're gaining from thinking about COVID pandemic in Europe. And I'm cheating because I know he's done some work on this.
Right. Well, so again, kind of the story, the saying that when you have a hammer, everything around start to look like nails. It's kind of my reaction here. I'm like, well, unfortunately, I cannot think of a solution in the short term, but at least in medium and long term, if there was any need for that, to me there wasn't, but I do hope that at least some decision makers, policy makers would draw that lesson from what's going on in the last few years, that you really, really do need a better education, both civic and scientific. So yeah, that's my hammer to nails answer. So
Yeah, so in Romania, do you have this sort of vaccine skeptic community?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That is, would you say, I
That
mean,
would be
because I
the-
know you're aware, you can make the comparison, would you say that has some of the same, some of the same dimensions that it does here? I mean, because, you know, you know,
absolutely.
Some of the I mean,
Mhm.
you know, for example, partisan predictions about, you know, how little or much people trust. Anyway, that looks
There's a
disturbingly red.
right. Well, okay, that's how I think part of why it is so red is just because well, the vast majority of localities would be here in this south, and they would be, you know, small towns, villages, things like that, which obviously make the bulk of Romanian localities, whereas that would be Cluj, my hometown. Over here you have Bucharest, Timișoara, Iași, like large cities. Yeah, it should be
I
over
can't
here.
actually
Yeah,
read the legend, so what's the range on it? Are these all rates?
it's less than 1% to about 60%. So
That's
yeah,
depressing.
yeah, that's pretty dramatic. I totally agree.
And
So
is it availability or is it choice?
is it?
Availability or choice, is it basically?
Yeah, it's mostly by this time. It's
2020?
it's November, but for instance, I got well, not the booster, which I got in the fall, but the second dose on Valentine's Day. Like, so it was really early. In the first couple of months, it was very difficult, yes, but by, you know, late spring, early summer, it was already like they were asking you, please come. We do not want these vaccine doses. So yeah, Romania is pretty bad in this respect. So it's still well under 50% of the population being fully vaccinated. So yeah, it's in the first months, yeah, it was a question of availability, but it ceased to be so very soon. So so by November, it was clearly mostly, although kind of getting in a way to your question, occasionally and in exceptional circumstances, it's also more complicated, as in we have this lady that's, sorry if I'm being politically incorrect, I'm not sure how to call her other than fascist. She was one of the 4 MPs who actually had a meeting with the Russian ambassador without asking for permission from party, where she's now independent, so to say. I mean, even the anti-vax, strongly anti-vax and loony party, even for that party, she was too extreme. So now she's an independent senator. So she actually went to this very remote, isolated locality last summer, I think it was, and she literally prevented people over there to get vaccinated. So there was this mobile unit that went there to vaccinate people, and this senator of Romania prevented that to happen. So, but that's really the exception. I mean, you don't have that many examples like that. So I would think of well over 90%, maybe close to 98, 99% of localities in Romania, you can get vaccinated if you want to. So that was a rather long and all over the place answer. Yeah, I hope it was at least somewhat marginal to the initial questions raised.
I mean, if I were being devil's advocate, I agree with Carol that if you want to publish a book on scientific medical research and political research right now, the COVID chapter or chapters just isn't natural. But my sense is it's not going to look like John Snow, that there are some serious statisticians who are at the moment in the minority, but saying that you can count the data and it's very hard to find good evidence of how much the mitigation did anything. So you take the kind of Denmark, Sweden comparison or the Indiana, Illinois, Iowa comparisons and say, how tough was the regime? How tough was the lockdown? What do the case data look like? What do the death data look like? And the justification was bending the curve. So we get people sick later, but the same number of people get sick. But a lot of it looks like, so there's small literature saying, heck of a lot of the lockdown didn't do what it was supposed to do. Or basically what drove the numbers was always seasonality and regional transmission. But that's not the whole story. Then the vaccination story is a totally different thing. That after people get vaccinated, they're getting sick and they're much less sick. But I don't know what the John Snow story would be. I think right now there are some people kind of peddling a John Snow story, which is the lockdown was a total fraud, and I think that's probably not right. But if you want to make that story, yeah, I carry on with the math now. With a simple kind of figure, I think it's not that hard to get some data to say, let's just compare Indiana and Illinois. Much tougher lockdown, much easier rules. They look like the same dumb curve. Why did we get locked up more in Illinois than Indiana? You plot the data out and then think about some controls. And it's very hard to say that Illinois can fare better than Indiana. So anyway, don't let the book become you could have written another book in COVID. But if you're going to have a chapter on COVID, I don't know what it would be right now off the top of my head. I think it's hard to think of what the neatest version of. Let's just let the data speak. Think about this scientifically and what should we look for in the data to find. It could be that it's just vaccination. It's never mind lockdowns. Let's just see what vaccination rates do.
Well, a few stories, yet again, like the chapter I could think of about COVID right now, it will be mostly based like in my MPSA paper, which was about this, and has some discussion of other people's research and some original, I would think so. So the two really interesting findings for me were that so there's this paper by some group of economists from Chicago who are comparing the two Fox News audiences, people who are watching mostly Tucker Carlson and people who are watching mostly Sean Hannity. That's really early in the pandemic, and this is a crucial detail. Very early in the pandemic, in the first couple of months, Tucker Carlson was actually, believe it or not, the voice of reason. So he was saying, yeah, we should be careful, we should do social distancing, you should wear masks, blah, blah, and so on and so forth, where Hannity wasn't. And you'd see a clear impact. So Tucker Carlson's viewers were actually wearing way more likely to wear masks, to do social distancing, and be careful, and so on and so forth, compared to Sean Hannity's audience. Another really interesting thing for me to find was we all have this image about both the Republican Party and the Republican voters being more anti-science, skeptical about climate change, about evolution, about everything. The one major exception to this was about vaccines, up until recently. So there was this Pew Research survey in 2015, right before Trump, so 1 year before Trump, asking respondents whether they think whether MMR is safe. And the numbers for Democrats and Republicans were the same. In fact, it's probably, I'm pretty sure it's within margin of reason, but still, it was funny that it was 86% for Democrats, 88% for Republicans. So Republicans were slightly more likely to say that MMR vaccines are safe. So these would be the two things that, well, it's not my research, I'm just looking at what other people have done. The thing that would be my original contribution would be, I was looking at some of the, not just rhetoric, very, very specific arguments, and it was really fascinating. So there was one of the most famous, if not the most famous interview on COVID by Donald Trump. This was summer of 2020, yeah, must have been, with Jonathan Swan is the name of the Australian, is a reporter who actually got a Pulitzer for that interview. So, and in that interview, Donald Trump showed a graph from our world in data with case fatality rate going down. And therefore, Trump was saying, well, so clearly things are going in the right direction. And Jonathan Swan was very confused for like 30 seconds. What? Look at the graph. Oh, so you're looking at the ratio between number of deaths and number of new infections. Well, and it was going down, indeed, but it's a ratio. So both number of deaths and number of cases can go up. If one goes up faster than the other, the ratio can go down, which it did. Whereas number of deaths and number of cases were going up at the time. Now, it's not fast forward, it's fast backwards, but Donald Trump used the exact same arguments like a month before in an interview with Chris Wallace, but Chris Wallace wasn't as quick as Jonathan Swan, so he didn't challenge Donald Trump on that. A few days, well, in between the two interviews, there was this show on Romanian television where the guy showed a graph from our world on data on Romania, where case fatality rate was going down, and saying, see, therefore, things that could have been an accident, possibly, but I think it's highly unlikely, because well, that channel, Antenna 3 is really the functional equivalent of Fox News in Romania. So I really doubt that was an accident. Either way, it's truly fascinating seeing the exact same argument, not type of argument, the exact same argument in two different contexts. So that could be a short chapter, I would think, revised and made better. But so I can think of a short chapter on COVID, actually. I was actually thinking about a short chapter. The bonus here would be I could also have a short, an original contribution on the medical part, only on the poli-sci part. So in an ideal world, some editor would think this is an interesting project, and I can have a chapter on poli-sci and a chapter on medicine. So I'd be like I don't know, what's the lame version of Da Vinci being multi something.
Yeah.
Anyways,
But Florian,
So-
I mean, part of, one of the contributions, one of the struggles of all this is, you're talking about attitudes to a certain extent and interpreting statistics, but in your second two cases, you're talking about health outcomes, and that was sort of what Brian was talking about. That is the hard part. I mean, that's much harder than to try to understand. I mean, I think it's very interesting how vaccine attitudes have shifted. But it's also true, we're still struggling to understand what any of these interventions mean in terms of health outcomes. And on an anecdotal level, you probably all know people who've been perfectly careful and follow all the protocols and still got COVID. But at sort of macro level, that's very interesting. Maybe it's too soon to know, but it's also, if you have anything to say about that down the line, that's very important because this is not the last pandemic.
right.
I mean, you can pretty much be sure that COVID is a case study in something that we better get a better grip on. So Brian's point about how we decipher what works
Right.
is also part of what you should be thinking about, I think.
No, but absolutely, totally agree. And it's also kind of, I mean, if that works, even not very well, but even, satisfactorily, it will be, in a way, more important than, there were other people talking about Jon Snow, and to me, I just trying to make an improvement. But a chapter like this would be say, okay, here's how this really matters. So why we should read about Jon Snow.
So keep it percolating,
Yeah.
because I think
No,
I think that's
absolutely.
a frustrating part of his story.
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure out what that is. What? So can I stop this?
No, definitely not. He's in charge of it.
I'm sorry, I'll get out of here.
So
Brian, you might be able to guess, Theo was at my house today.
as long as I'm piling work on you, the other thing that occurs to me that what I would love to see that will give you another original lead would be the follow up to the econometric piece is lots of places have introduced electronic voting, not so cleanly as to give us this analytical evidence. But if we believe that there are other places that have high invalid ballot rates and if they introduced electronic voting and it didn't work, or it did change it, but it didn't improve infant outcomes. There's lots of reasons why Texas, as Carol said, it's a long positive change. So left-wing parties got elected and then they didn't do anything with healthcare, or they put in terrible healthcare reforms that actually made healthcare worse. But it would be, I think, across national, so I believe the econometrical research, and it wasn't, this was a natural or an accidental experiment. I mean, the reason that electronic voting was not, I don't know if it actually was because they thought it would improve the left, but it wasn't to improve health outcomes necessarily, but it did. So looking around the world, can I find the same thing elsewhere? Or if I can't, why not? I think that as a follow-up chapter might also be, it's a little less clean, but I think it would be pushing the, what do you take away from this very clever analysis? The Senate meetings at, like, it's at 5:15, they say it's a witching hour because
That's right.
anybody can ask for an adjournment at 5:15 whether or not this business starts. So I don't know if it's the witching hour. Thanks again.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Probably it's a useful project. And under the heading of civic education, but without insulting anyone's intelligence. So that would be a good thing.